Episode 1 of L.U.C.A. The beginning starts with a mysterious figure cradling a baby. Hurrying through the eerily green hallways, numerous suited men chase after him. This man awoke with no memories, unsure of who he is, and repeats the mantra "You are not a monster" as he drops a baby down into the depths of this building. As he does, the child suddenly sprouts bolts of lightning, the cocoon of energy that transforms this child into a young man. Chaos is left in his wake, as a badly burned man called Yu-1 crawls toward him. While our lightning child, who we find out is actually called Jiao, escapes, the burned man is brought to a scientist called Ryu Jinquan. They're inside human tech, and as screams pierce the air he injects the man with a syringe. Jiao patches himself up alone, looking in his wallet at numerous different burned and charred memories. Flashes of the past start to come back though, as these scenes mirror the start of Born Identity. Who is Jiao? Where has he come from? And why are these men after him? We then jump 1 year later. Choi Jin-hwan arrives with his fellow officers to check out a construction site. With the excavator stopped, he meets Gu-ryum, who happens to be from the Hwan Metropolitan Branch. A random bystander arrives and immediately contaminates the crime scene, eventually sending Gu-ryum back to the forensic service, having taken what she needed. She speaks to her professor with the dental records, admitting that she's trying to find whether the body is Kang Yong-soo, but refuses to divulge exactly why she wants to know. Well, it's not an exact match, but the professor is pretty sure it's the same man. On the way out, she runs into Jin Hwan in the elevator. It turns out Jin Hwan has done his research and confronts Gu-yun. Apparently she's not even part of the major crime unit anymore. However, she refuses to engage with the men, and tells them to cut out the belly fat before she goes. It turns out she's investigating the death of her parents, looking closely at whoever is aligned to try and find some crucial leads. At work the next day, Gu-ryum tries to keep a low profile, but she's eventually called out as the newbie of the team. Jin Hwan is sure they can reconcile their differences though, as Gu-ryum learns a valuable lesson, listening to her captain as he encourages her to drink, and then berates her for drinking, while she's on duty. Meanwhile, our lightning child Jiao works as a delivery driver for Dajiong Resources, keeping a low profile for the time being. He questions the natural order of things, eventually being called cold and heartless by his colleague Mansik. Jiao is eventually told to clean up the truck. After work, Jiao eats scraps, while thinking over his past, wondering quite what he's missing from his memory. Deputy Chief Kim arrives at a strange cult-like building, where a woman dressed in white, Wang Ying-a, talks about sacrifices. For now, the true nature of what's happening is kept hidden from us, but it's clear that this is going to have a big part of the future. Jiao arrives with another shipment, dropping off frozen meat at human tech. Jiao senses something up, smelling a foul stench. For now, he drives away, but as he does he notices Gu-ryum arriving. As Gu-ryum enters to question the scientists, we cleverly jump back and forth as Mansik, the man Jiao works with, mentions how human tech are always dropping off animal waste ranging from dolphins up to gorillas. Inside human tech, Gu-ryum learns that they currently have no boss. The company is privately funded, but as Gu-ryum leaves, she senses something is going on. We soon see what, as the scientist inside heads down to the basement, where numerous animals are being kept in cages. Jinquan continues to experiment though, berating his chief researcher, while heading back into his office. Numerous jars sit on the wall, while chalk is scrawled messily across the chalkboard. The investors are growing restless though, determined to press on. Unfortunately he has a week to try, and make his experiments a success. If he can't do that, then it seems funding will be pulled. Gu-ryum senses that she's onto something and tries to do some research into human tech herself. The only problem is, nothing shows up online. Well, there's not much time to dwell on that, as Gu-ryum heads out with her fellow officers on the hunt and busting an illegal operation. During a foot chase, Gu-ryum is stuck by a truck and narrowly misses Jiao, who does his best to try and resuscitate her. Somehow, he channels the red energy in his hands, and brings her back from being knocked unconscious. In doing so, this brings back fragments of the past as we see Gu-ryum knocked across the room from jolts of lightning. Was this Jiao's doing? Well, a video of Jiao with Gu-ryum begins circling as we see that the burn victim from before is a man named Yi-sun. He notices the video, while Gu-ryum spots it too, deciding to find Jiao. They're not the only ones who see this viral video either. Jinquan views this and comments how Jiao is his failed experiment from before. Jinquan is currently trying to create a copy of what they built with him, eventually leading Jinquan to the difficult decision of needing to bring Jiao in for experiments. All eyes now turn to Dajiong resources as both Jinquan's men and Gu Ryum head to Jiao's location. With the cameras cut, Jiao senses something up as he checks his arm and notices the hairs are standing on end. He's overpowered by these men though, holding him up and forced to watch as they look set to inject him with a syringe. Outside, Man-Sik is thrown into the fire. Jiao manages to get away though, taking off into the woods after channeling a burst of lightning. He's Chaz though, as Yi-sun believes he may have head back home. At the same time, the officers arrive at the waste center and find the dead body of Man-Sik in the incinerator. They also confirm the security cameras were switched off, making it seem like Jiao may be responsible. Well, Yi-sun makes the right call as Jiao is chased across the rooftops near his home and blindsided by his foe. Thankfully Jiao manages to get away. He runs straight into the path of Gu Ryum though, who spots him being chased, and hurries up the alleyways after him. Unfortunately she loses sight of the runaway, as Jiao eventually finds himself face to face with Yi-sun. He slashes at Jiao, like a predator playing with its prey, as he eventually snaps and grabs Yi-sun again. Unfortunately he's kicked over the edge of the building and falls down to the ground. As he does, a huge shockwave of lightning crackles around, sending cars flying up in the air. Gu Ryum can only stand and watch as the episode comes to a close. Episode 2 of L.U.C.A. The beginning returns to the aftermath of that shocking climax, as Jiao collapses on the floor, leaving shattered pavement blocks in his wake. As Yi-sun brandishes a knife and prepares to finish the job, a whole host of innocent bystanders arrive and unintentionally save him. There are way too many people around, so for now, Yi-sun regroups. As they leave, we cut back to human tech, where numerous babies are kept in incubators. Investor Kim Chil-soo and scientist Jin Kwon learn about the botched operation and fret, realizing that Jiao is at the hospital. Both are determined to bring him in. They're worried because of his blood composition. If they try to do blood tests on him, that could unveil the truth that he's not a normal human. Well, the pair task Yi-sun and his teammates to bring Jiao back as a matter of urgency. One of the members joining him happens to be Yuna, who's had a pretty interesting upbringing, having lost her leg originally and now back to a good level of fitness. She joins the team, ready to hunt. While Gu Ryum recovers in the hospital, we cut back in time and see flashes of the past, including how little Jiao was taken in by her parents to stay for the night. Only, in the middle of the night she spots him stuffing his face with cake. This level of stress causes Jiao to lose control and blast the place with crackles of lightning. As Gu Ryum calls out for her parents, she awakens with a start. Captain Choi arrives to see Gu Ryum, but when he realizes she's okay, he visits Jiao instead. He's not in a good state, having fractured his cervical spine and sporting ruptured organs. He's also unable to receive a blood transfusion, given the doctors are unable to determine what blood type he is. Things don't look good for Jiao. As Choi watches the boy fight for his life, Yu-chil mentions the strange circumstances surrounding his drop. Choi is not happy about Yu-chil calling the case weird, even though it is, eventually leading to Gu Ryum interrupting them and checking on Jiao's condition. Given she was an eyewitness that night, Choi leans on her for support, as she mentions that there was an explosion and another man up on the roof with Jiao that night. Choi tasks the team with checking out the crime scene, while Gu Rem is told to head home. Well, she obviously doesn't listen and begins looking into details surrounding Jiao's strange upbringing instead. She stumbles upon a clue in the form of Yuqin Church, and clings to this lead, realizing it links in with her parents' case. Back at the hospital, Jiao begins to stir, bringing the doctors in to try and resuscitate him using a defibrillator. It seems to work, and Jiao returns from the brink. He's still not in a great state, though, and everyone is understandably shocked. This distraction is enough for Yi-sun and his men to infiltrate the hospital. The cameras are cut, and all the players move into position, ready to strike. Gu Ryum shows up to check on Jiao though, deciding to head in and talk to him privately. She sits alongside the boy, telling Jiao that she's met him before and asking him to speak. Only, she's interrupted by doctors arriving and moving Jiao out the ward. Unbeknownst to them though, the doctors are actually Yi-sun and his goons in disguise. Gu Ryum suspects something is up though, especially when they take him away without the patient charts. In the elevator, Gu Ryum suspects who they really are, but they're interrupted by Jiao suddenly awakening and fighting. It's clear that his blood is special and something is happening to him, as he evades the trio and fights with them in the elevator. We're then graced with an absolutely stunning one-shot take, which seamlessly transitions into a point-of-view shot as Jiao fights against these men. This shot alone is well worth watching again. Eventually the fight spills out of the elevator and down the hallways. Jio does his best to evade the men, hiding in a closet as Yi-sun comes up short again. Well, that is until he spots a room with no lights on, and immediately heads up to investigate. He finds the bloodied rags of Jio, but the boy is nowhere to be found. Jio manages to slip outside, but Gurium spies him from afar and hurries after him. Gurium calls for backup before eventually finding Jio by the Episode 3 of L.U.C.A. The beginning starts with flashbacks in the past as we see Gurium scared and alone in her house, while her parents take Jio outside. Lightning crackles across the sky, strobing the black landscape with brilliant flashes of blue and white. We then cut back to the present. Captain Choi finds the taser and immediately calls on his officers to close up the area and search everyone. Jio and Gurium find themselves caught in the middle of this, as Jio uses his electrical power, supercharging a mobile and exploding it in a nearby bin. Chaos grips the area as a fire breaks out. Jio uses this distraction to escape with Gurium, fleeing to a secluded area. While this is going on, we cut across to the National Forensic Service, with two doctors confirming that Jio's blood includes a whole mix of DNA. Human, jellyfish, electric eels and even flies are part of the composite mix. This sort of splicing is obviously illegal, but it brings them to discuss Jin Quan, the infamous scientist in this field who's well known to be a bit insane. When Yi-sun heads back to the office, he's given one last chance to catch Jio. This time, the soldier is given the incentive of taking one of Jio's arms for himself, but only if he brings him back. Meanwhile, Gurium awakens, and immediately lashes out at Jio, who eventually calms her down. Gurium thanks him for saving her as he lets his guard down long enough to slip away. Only, she waits outside the door, and has second thoughts. Jio has lost a lot of his memories, and doesn't remember what's happened. It's here Gurium discusses the past, and in particular his lightning powers, and how he attacked her as a child. Jio hangs his head, admitting he has no knowledge of anything beyond fragments of different scenes. Midway through talking though, Jio's hairs stand on end as he realizes someone has arrived. It's E1. Gurium does her best to fight him off, but he's too much and easily overpowers her. When Jio starts banging on the door, she does her best to knock him down, but the genetically enhanced goon is too much. She's overpowered, but just as things look bleak, Captain Choi and the others show up and rescue her. As they head on after Yuwon, Gurium lets Jio go, but tells him to return at 7 p.m. In his absence, Yuwon turns his attention to Gurium, and specifically how it seemed like Jio was protecting her. Well, Chil-soo mentions that all of this started back when the co-founder of Human Tech took off with Jio as a baby. He also grabbed lab notes on his way too. In a brief flashback, we hear Chil-soo mention how he and wife both disappeared, although a flashback betrays that idea by showing Chil-soo threaten him and his wife. What's the real story here? Meanwhile, the NFS worker, Jung-won, asks Gurium for her help in tracking down Jio. He breaks the news about Jio's test results and wants her to look into Jin-kwon. He's gone off the radar after his outburst in the past, claiming humanity needs to evolve and stop regressing. Well, these dangerous thoughts caused him to be expelled, especially on the back of his experiments involving animals. Specifically, his end goal here was to create a sort of hybrid chimera. Learning this spurs Gurium on to try and get some answers. She returns to the hideout that evening with Jio, where he talks about a set of fragmented memories from the past. They're only glimmers of the horror he went through, including that Academy loan business card we've been seeing. Well, after throwing a French fry at his head, Gurium decides to help him remember his past. Back at work, Captain Choi questions Gurium over what happened in the subway station and encourages her to take a half day, handing over a new phone. The only trouble is, that phone has been bugged, which gives away her location to Yi-sun. As she heads off, she joins Jio as they arrive at a secluded church that may hold the key to unlocking his past. She encourages Jio to keep quiet while they head in to visit Sister Stella. This used to be a children's home, but hasn't housed children for quite a while. Gurium asks about the past, specifically what happened 20 years prior involving Jio. Stella claims not to know anything, until the name of Jio is brought up. Apparently Jio came on his own and was standing by a statue of the Virgin Mary. Repeating his own name like a mantra, Stella admits she doesn't remember the exact date he arrived, but does remember key pieces of his past. He was adopted numerous times, but every time he was taken away, they'd only keep the child for a day before bringing him back, terrified of his powers. It turns out Jio was responsible for blinding Sister Stella, and also burned the church down too. Sister Stella claims he has a demon inside him, prompting Jio to suddenly speak up. She touches his face, shaking the entire time, and realizes that what he says rings true. Sister Stella hurries out and prays, claiming again that Jio is a demon. When he looks at a stained glass window, memories suddenly come flooding back, including flames consuming the church and the sisters all praying for the demon inside him to leave. Constantly spraying him in holy water, Jio suddenly let his electric powers be known. And just like before, Jio loses control of his powers in the present and screams at Stella to stop, exploding and causing the church to set on fire again. Episode 4 of L.U.C.A. The beginning returns to the church as Jio loses control and sends a shockwave of electric currents right through the room. Approaching Sister Stella, Jio screams and illuminates Yuchian church into an inferno of angry flames. This, unfortunately, acts as a signal for Yi-sun and his goons to show up. Covering their mouths, the trio head inside and remain on the hunt for Jio as he hurries away with Gurium. Only, on the way he spies a statue of the Virgin Mary and suddenly regains his memories. Sobbing, Gurium takes him outside, and they drive away, thankfully just in time as Yi-sun and the others scramble out and watch them leave. Unfortunately, Yi-sun's mistake causes him to return empty-handed to the lab. Although he's certain that the pair will turn up soon, he apologizes after being slapped repeatedly for what happened. Well, when L.U.C.A leaves, Junquan talks to Yu-won about his arm, telling him to have faith. Interestingly, he clearly has a dark past as we see glimpses of Yi-sun out in the field as a soldier, hit with a grenade. By comparison, Yuna's life as a soldier came to a nasty end when her gun happened to have live rounds rather than blanks. After shooting one of her comrades by accident, she turned the gun on herself and shot her leg. She tells Yu-won that she hopes this isn't a coincidence, especially since they both have a tragic past. Yu-won simply remains straight-faced and tells her not to dwell on this, reminding her not to lax on her surveillance. Meanwhile, Gurium speaks to Captain Choi and gives him the license plate for the black car. According to the records, this model has been scrapped. But how can that be if it's right there? Alas, the plot thickens. After feeding this news back to Choi, Gurium remains more determined than ever to figure out who Jio really is. Well, that involves seeing Oh Jong-hwan at the NFS after hours. He suggests they conduct some tests, but Jio is not so sure this is a good idea. Eventually Gurium convinces Jio to have a biopsy and some blood tests done. When he gets his spinal fluid taken, it brings back painful memories from the past, and he hurries away, charging out the lab and into the street. Gurium hurries after him, checking up on Jio to make sure he's okay. She apologizes for what happened, as he starts to show off his brilliant blue eyes and electric power. Gurium manages to calm him down though, which is a recurring theme that Jio picks up on. From this, he deduces that he can't be the one who killed her parents as she's not a threat to him. Jio eventually decides to leave, after causing a shockwave to ripple through the bus stop. When Gurium looks back, after shielding her eyes, Jio is gone. In the morning, Gurium returned to the office with coffee for Captain Choi. He immediately suspects something is up though, and soon discovers what. The phone she was given is busted, prompting her to apologize and hand it back. As she hurries off, Choi calls after her, annoyed. In fact, he sits with her and asks outright whether she's okay, especially on the back of how badly fried the phone is. Midway through talking, the phone rings prompting Gurium to pick up and hurry out the station. As she does, Yu-won and Yuna follow her car, determined to figure out where she's going. Jio wanders the streets until he finds the familiar loan card from before. Ringing the number, he gets through to a man named Won-yi, who claims to be his friend. He's not too surprised about Jio forgetting the address and encourages him to show up. Well, show up he does, and after a quick hug from his eccentric friend, helps himself to some noodles. Won-yi also knows about his electricity powers. They have been friends for a long time, having left the orphanage together all those years ago. They used to swindle people out in the streets, with Jio using his powers to shock unsuspecting victims into submission. Won-yi would encourage him to constantly use his powers, including frying the locks off at jewelers. Well, more of the issues at the church come to light too, including how Jio and Won-yi were bullied by the other kids. This explains why he lost control and burned the place down. Or at least more of the underlying issue alongside Sister Stella throwing holy water on him. While Jio is sleeping, Won-yi creeps through his apartment and phones A01. This, unfortunately, is a result of Yu-won getting to him first and torturing the man into submission. Meanwhile, Gurium speaks to Jong-hwan about the experiment and in particular, the different entities that seem to be mixed together. Given these experiments are forbidden, he admits he's 99% sure this has been manufactured. Because of that, Gurium is tasked with sticking by Jio no matter what. Well, Jio has problems of his own when Yi-sun and his goons show up in the apartment. Jio fights them off though until he's injected with a syringe by Yuna. Collapsing on the floor, Yu-won tasks his subordinates with finding the witnesses currently snapping photos and videos, while he takes Jio away. Meanwhile, Junkwon comes under fire when Jio's physical results are uploaded online. Chil-soo is certain that the data must have been leaked, prompting him to question Junkwon's loyalty. Thankfully, he's interrupted by a call from Yu-won telling him that Jio has been captured. Despite injecting him with several syringes, Jio conjures forth his lightning abilities and blasts the car off the road. After scrambling free from the wreckage, a fireball consumes the car as the episode comes to a close. Episode 5 of L.U.C.A. The beginning begins with Jio crashing Yi-sun's car and walking away. However, our foe has managed to stumble free. As the car explodes, Jio heads back into town and rings Gurium. Remembering the professor's words last episode, Gurium deliberates over whether to really stop Jio at all costs or not. And just like that, Jio shows up while she's out looking for him. Gurium clutches her gun tightly, but hesitates when Jio asks why no one likes him. Bemoaning how he has no one by his side, Jio staggers forward and hugs her, prompting Gurium to think twice about shooting him. Instead, she allows Jio to hide out at her apartment while she gets ready for work. As she heads to the NFS, the country finds itself under crisis as hackers have managed to attack the entire online banking system. With the server gone, including the research papers, it turns out Wang Ying-a from the L.U.C.A project is responsible. She's determined to gain Jio for herself, learning about his electrical power, and speaking to Chil-soo about her plans for the future. They want to raise an army of clones to shape the future of humanity, unless Jio can stop them of course. Back at the lab, Chil-soo is called in on the back of Yi-sun losing Jio again. Chil-soo is not happy, repeatedly slapping Yi-sun in the face. Arlette Goon approaches the professor though, and asks for him to make the man stronger. Despite being initially hesitant to do so, Junkwon eventually agrees to inject them with this serum again. After, they approach the NFS parking lot and trick Jong-hwan, with Yi-sun drugging him and handing over his ID badge to Tae-oh. When he awakens, Jong-hwan finds himself tied to the steering wheel with nowhere to go. Yi-sun injects him with a syringe and demands to know where Jio is. Jong-hwan eventually spills the truth to Yi-sun over where they are. As soon as he does, Yi-sun rolls the car into the lake, killing Jong-hwan. Back home, Gurium goes over details of her childhood case to Jio. Everyone involved in this has either died or gone missing, leaving her with a single post-it note referring to Jinghwan. She believes this their only option for uncovering the truth and finding out what really happened. Back at work, Captain Choi approaches Gurium and breaks the bad news to her. She races to the NFS in time to see Jong-hwan taken away on a stretcher. She demands they do an autopsy to uncover what happened, as Gurium mourns for his death. Down by the river, Gurium pours soju in the water and begins sobbing, saying goodbye to her friend. On the other side of the lake happens to be Yi-sun, watching from afar. He doesn't make a move though, instead following from afar as Gurium stumbles home drunk. At work, Gurium is determined to try and investigate the case, but Captain Choi is adamant that it's closed. She decides to try and get some evidence, asking for a warrant in order to obtain this. Choi and the other detectives aren't happy, especially given how it makes them look, as they all walk away. Yuchil hangs back though, convincing Gurium to put together a believable scenario to force the officer's hand and give her a warrant. Gurium immediately investigates Jong-hwan's office, finding out from his colleague that he rarely drank alcohol. As she continues on the road, Gurium's car suddenly grinds to a halt, which happens to be a direct result of Yi-sun and his men sabotaging the engine earlier in the day. They immediately catch her and take Gurium away, abducting her from her car. When Jio learns about this, he races up to the L.C.A plaza where he intends to try and save Gurium before it's too late. Jio sabotages the electrics, blindsiding Tae-oh and saving Gurium before it's too late. With Yi-sun thwarted again, he tells Gurium she needs to survive and drives away, with Tae-oh caught as a hostage. Yuna heads in with a scanner and finds the heat signature of Tae-oh, fried and in a bad way. They abandon hope of finding Jio and take their man back to the lab. Only this time, Jio decides to track them down himself in his car. Well, it's not quite good enough as Yi-sun figures out Jio's game and lies in wait. He shows Jio the secret lab and convinces him to head in. Episode 6 of L.U.C.A. The beginning begins with Jio being shown the secret lab hidden beneath human tech. Instead of heading down though, he starts fighting against Yi's son. Jio uses his electric powers and causes an almighty shockwave, knocking Yi's son back. It's a momentary blast, in truth, as he stands back up and eventually knocks Jio out. Scientists rush Jio downstairs on a stretcher as he's brought into solitary confinement. In desperate need of treatment, L.U.C.A reminds Jinquan that Jio has the ability to heal himself, so they don't need to do anything. In fact, L.U.C.A goes one step further and asks the scientists there to clone Jio's cells and begin mass producing in secret without telling anyone. A war is coming, and things do not look good for our characters. Jinquan heads in to see Jio while he's recovering, and tells him he's home now. Jinquan reveals that he's his father as Jio looks on, shocked. The scientists outside comment how he seems to be doing this to unsettle him and make Jio question everything he knows. In fact, he reveals himself to be the Jinquan from his past, and admits that Jio is the only person he loves. It seems like Jio's amnesia was caused by the electrical charges, and that's why he's only retained the most powerful of memories. His mother left when he was younger, and his biggest threat is, according to Jinquan anyway, to be young Jae. Or as Jinquan eventually retorts L.U.C.A. It turns out he started a fire at the lab, and Jio followed him. Apparently he was going to sell Jio because he's special, and that man happens to be Gurium's father. Unfortunately his time runs out as Jio fully recovers. Just before he heads out the room, he tells Jio he needs to find the answers himself. As he puts a gas mask on, a strange toxic gas fills the room that blinds and knocks Jio down to the ground. Jinquan seems to be genuine though, especially when he heads out the room and watches as Jio is taken to surgery. Their plan involves L.U.C.A making angels by cloning his cells and creating a new army. Only, it turns out L.U.C.A and L.U.C.A are planning to work together and oust Jinquan, making it so he doesn't take any of the credit for what they plan to do. Back inside, Jinquan continues his experiments, testing Jio's resolve and seeing how many volts he can withstand. Meanwhile, Gurium is interviewed by Captain Choi. He asks about Jio and mentions the fire at the church. Unfortunately, it seems like Sister Stella has informed him that Gurium was there that fateful afternoon. He threatens to handcuff her as Gurium shrugs off the threat and actually handcuffs herself. Choi struggles to get any answers from her, and instead instructs the officers outside to get her some beef bone soup. While they do, Captain Choi heads back to Gurium's place where he finds all the pictures up on the wall surrounding Jio, and the pieces of the case surrounding her parents. Alongside Kim Yu-chil, they hurriedly take pictures of what's there. When he returns, he shows her the pictures on the wall and asks exactly who she is. Instead, Jio turns things around on him and tells Choi he entered her apartment without a warrant. Still unable to answer, Choi takes her out for a drink and reveals what he knows. Choi claims he worked on her case for over 10 years, but there was never any evidence they could use to try and work out what happened. It turns out Gurium has been investigating for 9 of those years too, and Choi wants to know exactly who Jio is, and what connection he has to this case. Choi asks her to stop and to let her parents go, as Gurium downs her drink and struggles to hold back tears. As she begins sobbing, she remains stubborn and decides to let the officers investigate her. Determined to try and solve the case, Choi makes a deal with Gurium and decides to help, telling her to report directly to him. If she can do that, then he'll delete the pictures and help her. Gurium heads home and places up another post-it surrounding Professor Zhang Huan's death. Looking up at the billboard, she contemplates exactly where Jio may be. Now that Gurium is working with the officers, Yu-chil approaches her and admits that there's something very strange with this case. Gurium confides in him and mentions how she's looking for Jinquan. This brings her to Huan College and even a law firm, as she tries to find out who he is and where he may be now. Apparently the entire nation hated him, especially when he was found guilty of embezzlement. We then inexplicably cut forward 3 weeks as it seems like Jio's cells are being multiplied. Meanwhile, Gurium arrives at the prison and interviews the officers about Jinquan and what happened to him. According to the records, he received a large commissary deposit on a certain day, which was donated by a person called Kim Jae-suk. This also links to human tech too, as the threads of the case slowly begin to come together. This brings her back online as she begins investigating the electricity bill of human tech, which is incredibly high. At the same time, Jinquan looks over Jio's ravaged body, preparing to kill his own creation on this day. He's managed to extract the L.U.C.A cells and created embryos which they intend to breed. Jio vows to kill him though. No one at Human Tech bet on Gurium getting involved, and she begins looking around Human Tech. In fact, she immediately calls the scientists out and asks to see the basement. When he refuses, she begins searching around herself. That is, until the scientist bashes her in the face with a glass jar. I have to say, it's amazing how many headshots these characters take without batting an eye. Downstairs though, Yingquan shows his true colors. Whispering to Jiao, he mentions how he used to have 7 fingers as a child. He was teased and bullied a lot back then, but surgery to fix his hand left him paralyzed. With a syringe in hand, he tells Jiao to leave and run away, heading down the elevator at the end of the hallway on the right. A different syringe is injected into him, one that seems to bring his powers back. He says goodbye to Jiao as Gurium makes it to the basement. She fights off a whole swarm of guards with a metal pole. While she does, Jiao manages to recover from his injuries and sends a shockwave rippling through the basement. Once again, Jiao beats down Yi-sun with ease as he marches through the basement trying to find Jingquan. Coming up trumps, he eventually heads into his office where he finds a picture of Jingquan with a young boy, presumably that of Jiao. The rest of the scientists all scarper, charging away as Jiao finds the test tubes he was presumably built in. Screaming for his creator, the episode comes to a close. Episode 7 of L.U.C.A. The beginning opens in the lab under Human Tech. Jiao fights his way through a whole hallway of goons, dispatching them all with ease. As he does, Yuna encourages a weakened and bloodied Yi-sun to stop and leave. He grabs her and chokes the girl out, leaving his comrade on the ground, while he marches on to find Jiao. Our protagonist meanwhile runs into Gurium, who encourages him to leave. Jiao does no such thing though, instead remaining determined to find Jingquan. Instead, he finds Yi-sun. Gurium is knocked through a glass window where she finds numerous babies crying. She clutches each of them up and tries to save them, but it's no good. Jiao unleashes an almighty shockwave, knocking Yi-sun out again. Jiao also crackles the electrics and causes a huge fire to break out. With the whole place looking set to explode, Jiao saves all the babies in Gurium before racing away. Thankfully, the place doesn't explode. Gurium seems to be suffering from a cracked skull though, as Jiao seemingly abandons the baby's dot somewhere. He rushes Gurium to the hospital, hoping that she'll be okay. Yuna meanwhile, finds her captain on the floor bleeding out, asking her to find Jiao. He's too weak to move and decides to stay in the lab. Back at L.U.C.A, Chil-Soo and Young-A discuss what's happened and the money they've lost in the wake of the lab being destroyed. However, Chil-Soo slaps some sense into his co-partner, deciding to rebuild the lab from scratch. After all, they have the frozen embryos and everything they need to start making clones. In private, Chil-Soo encourages Jingquan to pick a side. He wants him to sell one clone to Young-A while keeping the rest for himself. That way he can sell them all and make lots of money for the pair. In the morning, police arrive at Human Tech and see the devastation for themselves. It turns out Human Tech have a witness, someone who survived what happened. He's taken to the hospital where Choi and the others decide to visit and get some answers. Unfortunately, this scientist has pinned the blame on Gurium, claiming she's murdered everyone. Choi is clearly doubtful, especially when he sees the researcher eating without a care in the world. When Jiao finds out and realizes what's happening, he races away with Jiao on a stretcher and decides to try and save her. He smashes a car window, hot-wiring the vehicle and taking Gurium away. When she finds out about the dead bodies and what happened at Human Tech, Jiao suggests he turn himself in. Gurium is not so sure, and given she's now a murder suspect, believes this may not be the best move. Instead, Jiao takes her to Won-Yi's place to hide out. He's not exactly happy about it though, until he finds out that Gurium is a cop. Then he starts to come around to the idea a little, as the trio sit and eat. After, they check the news and see that Gurium has been framed for everything. The story claims she broke in secretly to find files on Human Tech, and in doing so, murdered the workers inside. Gurium heads outside silently and contemplates trying to find evidence to put down Human Tech once and for all. She's determined to turn the light on and expose them for everything. While they talk, slimy Won-Yi deliberates over whether to phone the police and inform them what's happening or not. Eventually the pair head inside and see what Won-Yi is doing. Well, Jiao decides to fry his phone just to be on the safe side. Meanwhile, Yi-sun is injected again. This seems like deja vu, as Yi-sun recovers and informs Young-A that Yuna is the one responsible for destroying the evidence in the lab and moving all the dead bodies to the ground floor. In the wake of all this, Young-A suggests the pair work for her now. She promises to grant them one thing that they both want. That evening, Gu heads out and uses a payphone, ringing Choi to update him what's happening. Given he the only one she can trust, she admits she didn't kill anyone and mentions the secret lab. She decides they should investigate the basement lab together, and tells him to meet at Human Tech on the first floor. Unfortunately, Choi seems to have been compromised and rings L.U.C.A, letting him know what's happening. It turns out he's blackmailing the cop given he's hiding a death in his past. Anyway, Gu shows up as scheduled, but the secret entrance is gone. Choi reminds her not to get caught as he breaks the news that it's over for her now. While Choi walks away, numerous officers arrive to take her away. Gu does her best to fight them off, but it's no good. With things looking bleak, Jae-oh shows up and turns the tables, helping her outside as they prepare to leave. Choi shows though and points a gun at the pair. Jae-oh takes a bullet for Gu as she knocks him to the ground and looks set to strike him down. She thinks twice though and eventually leaves as the police captain is left to bemoan his actions. This single act makes Gu a public enemy as her face is plastered across the news. As police close in on their location, Jae-oh's hair stands on end as he suspects something is up. He grabs Gu and they take off to the roof. Jae-oh suggests they break through the mall, but Gu reminds him that these are their colleagues. Instead of fighting, they evade the officers and make it down to the ground floor, slipping away to safety. At L.U.C.A, Yi-sun continues to recover as the new lab is set up. At the same time, Gu and Jae-oh head down to the dock and get themselves a bus to Suwon Ranch. This happens to be a place from Jae-oh's past. Could this unlock his missing memory? Episode 8 of L.U.C.A. The beginning begins with Gu and Jae-oh making it to the ranch. While they recover and begin farming, we cut forward in time by 3 months. Yi-sun blindsides the former researcher at Human Tech, Kim. He takes him out into the fields, injecting the man with something and leaving a suicide note in his jacket. Phoning through to his contact, Yi-sun lets them know. News of this spreads as Gu listens to the radio and realizes that this news report could link to her. Gu decides she needs to go and tells Jae-oh that another person has died because of her. Jae-oh wants to stay behind while Gu believes they need to stop running. Well, the pair eventually start kissing as they begin to grow closer together. The two eventually head out for a walk together, where Jae-oh mentions what Jun-kwan told him about her. Specifically, how her father was one of the researchers in charge of the project. As they continue spending time on the ranch, another montage sees Gu full pregnant following their night together. This prompts the two to rely on Won-yi again, this time to supply them fake IDs. Gu is due to give birth soon too, as it seems like we've jumped forward in time once more. Meanwhile, Yoona continues to work behind Chil-soo's back, taking a USB drive full of information from the computer. Chil-soo and the others soon realize what she's done, but it's too late. She charges away from the complex just as Yi-sun hurries out and begins chasing her down the road. However, she manages to get away. Yi-sun instead turns his attention to Yoon-ae, where he spies Yoona up on the balcony. He lies to Chil-soo on the phone and tells him that he hasn't seen her yet. It doesn't matter too much to the researchers though, who realize they're on course to make history. 3 surrogate mothers have been chosen to carry Jae-oh's embryos, with Yoon-ae believing that these are going to be stronger and better than that of Jae-oh himself. While Yoon-ae embraces the project, Chil-soo admits that he's sick of this and wants to be done completely. Well, their work is far from over. When Jun-kwan opens the freezer, he finds the embryos gone. It turns out Yoona has taken off with them, and she's working with Yoon-ae in secret. Yoon-ae holds up her side of the bargain as she tells Yoona all about her history, including how she killed 5 people by accident. The time of giving birth draws nearer, as Gu is taken into hospital, while the trio of mothers at the lab go into labor too. At the lab, things take a shocking turn, quite literally. The mothers all die, unable to withstand the electrical power of their unborn children. Gu meanwhile, gives birth to a beautiful child. She tasks Jae-oh with naming their baby girl, but for now he deliberates on this, meeting Won-yi to receive the fake IDs. Choi meets with Yi-sun, who hands over an envelope involving a missing persons case summary. This happens to hold crucial information regarding Young-jae and his wife. This news spreads across Korea, as a broadcast surrounding Gu parents is spread, confirming their car succumbed to an electric blast. This seems to hint that Jae-oh is responsible. Gu immediately phones the police station and speaks to Yoo-chil privately. She wants a sample of the victim's DNA, to be sure it's her parents, and hurriedly hangs up. Choi senses something is up, though, and has the last number Yoo-chil was on the phone to check. Meanwhile, Yi-sun returns again, and this time takes Gu-ryum away from the hospital. When Jio finds out, he struggles to control his anger. Clutching the red shoe, he remains determined to find Gu-ryum no matter what. As his anger rises up, Jio heads back to the ranch and explodes, sending another electric shockwave high into Episode 9 of L.U.C.A. The beginning begins with Gu-ryum cradling her baby, while Yi-sun threatens her, telling the girl not to act up, and to do exactly as they say. A knock at the door brings in Captain Choi, who brings baby clothes and toys. Only, Gu-ryum is not exactly happy to see him. He dodges her questions and asks outright exactly where Jio is. When Gu-ryum tells him she doesn't know, Choi admits that the two bodies found outside are definitely her parents. Gu-ryum is not so sure he's telling the truth though, but Choi hands over a photo of her family. She asks him to run a DNA test. If he can do that, then she agrees to talk. Yi-sun loses his temper but does eventually agree to the test. It turns out all of this is being fabricated though, given the DNA test has been prepared in advance by L.U.C.A to confirm it's definitely her parents. Meanwhile, Jio meets Won-yi at a secluded rundown apartment where he's hiding out. He's despairing in the wake of what's happening and is determined to find Gu-ryum. He decides to stake out the police station, given it's the only way to catch a lad. Won-yi decides to do it himself to save his friend from being put in harm's way. It's a touching moment when that sees the two finally on the same page. After the DNA test fraud, Chil-soo heads back to L.U.C.A where he meets Young-ae and manager Young. It turns out manager Jang is now deputy chief, and she's in line to take over his position. Young-ae is doing some serious damage control, as we find out what happened that night. It turns out Ha Young-jae joined the research team because he wanted to create a human being that never got sick. Jin Kwan didn't have those same ideas, instead wanting to create a dangerous and unpredictable step forward for humanity, in the form of Jio. Young-jae actually took the child because he wanted to guarantee his family's safety. He reached out to another NIST department, showing himself to be a whistleblower. Chil-soo was the one who killed Young-jae, who was still alive, and survived the electric blast that consumed the car. Chil-soo was the one to eventually kill him. In fact, on the back of this and the other mistakes he's made, they've decided to pay Chil-soo off and get rid of him. Gu-ryum obviously doesn't know this, as Captain Choi turns up with all the evidence showing that Jio has killed her parents. She doesn't believe it though, thinking that he may have been set up. When this doesn't work, Choi changes his tactics slightly, and turns his attention to the baby. It's here he suddenly realizes that Jio is the father to her child. Midway through talking, Young-ae rings, and tells him that Chil-soo is off the case, and no longer working with L.U.C.A. This gives Choi an incentive to walk away, telling him to let Gu-ryum go. Chil-soo instead turns his attention to Yi-sun, and tells him to collect up as many ruthless guys as he can. They're going to burn the villa and the lab down, starting a war against those who have betrayed him. Sensing that this could cause some casualties, Yi-sun arrives to see Yuna, and tells her to watch out. Won-yi immediately sets to work plotting against Kim Yu-chil. He and Jio intend to kidnap Kim Yu-chil. Only, Choi and the other officers show up, and begin drinking with him, throwing a spanner in the works. Jio decides to handle this himself and knocks out Won-yi. While he waits outside, listening to the cops talk, Yu-chil deduces that Jio may have killed the child and Gu-ryum with his electric powers. Just then, they check outside and notice Jio staring through the window. They chase him up an alleyway as he tells them all that he needs to talk. After shrugging off the other officers, he confronts Choi, and asks outright exactly where Jio is. In fact, he even kidnaps the captain, and asks the same questions again, albeit in a far more aggressive manner. Gu-ryum is currently with Chil-soo, who spills the truth about the cult and the researching. He even breaks the news that Young-jae and Jung-won were lab partners. He spins the story about Young-jae and the car, claiming that Jio killed her parents that very night. Chil-soo suddenly receives a call from Jio via Choi's phone, demanding to know where she is. Instead, he gives a time and place to meet. That place happens to be L.U.C.A headquarters, as Jio bursts in purposefully, and demands to know where his partner is. He holds Yuna up by the throat, but she stabs him through the stomach. Eventually he throws her on the ground, but not before smashing the back of her head hard against the table. Bleeding out, Jio leaves her a crumpled heap on the floor. With Jio gone, Yi-sun shows up, and see his old friend dying. He grits his teeth, determined to find Jio, and make him pay. Unfortunately, this brings Yi-sun straight to Won-yi, demanding he call Jio holding his fingers. Won-yi tells Jio to run, as Yi-sun kicks him in the face several times. With a lead pipe in hand, Jio shows up and watches as Hwan Yi is hit in the face. Jio can only grit his teeth and watch. Episode 10 of L.U.C.A. The beginning begins where we left off, as Hwan Yi is beaten down with a lead pipe. Jio and Yu-won go toe-to-toe, where Jio once again defeats the world's worst henchman. After Hwan Yi fades away and dies from his injuries, Jio finds a card in Yu-won's jacket for hotel room 502. He immediately heads off to investigate. Meanwhile, Ying takes charge at L.U.C.A. as Jin-kwon excitedly chirps up about Jio's baby. When Ying takes off, she promises to bring Gu-ryum to him. This immediately sees suited men show up at Chil-su's complex as Gu-ryum is tussled to the ground and held back as her baby is taken away. Gu-ryum is warned that her child will die unless she cooperates, forcing her out the building, just as Jio heads inside. It's no good though. Gu-ryum and the suited goons manage to break away from Chil-su's rebel group and Gu-ryum is taken to the cult at L.U.C.A, where it seems like there's no way out. There, she meets Ying-a and Jin-kwon, warning them both that they're not to touch or harm her child. Gu-ryum remains suitably skeptical and allows the pair to show her around their lab. There, she sees the test tube babies that were in Jin-kwon's previous lab, but it's all too much for Gu-ryum. As Jin-kwon rattles on about superior species and merging creations into a super being, he encourages her to check out Jio's siblings. Staring at the test tubes, Gu-ryum is eventually sick on the floor. When Gu-ryum returns to her room, both Jin-kwon and Young-ae applaud themselves, seeing it as a win for them as they think Gu-ryum will play by their rules now. Gu-ryum, however, is determined not to be seduced. Captain Choi returns to the police station after his kidnapping ordeal, and is immediately taken away by Kim Yu-chil, who asks exactly what's going on. They know that Gu-ryum is missing, and Jio questioning him over where she is looks incredibly suspicious. Choi claims he lost his phone as Yu-chil continues. He retraced Choi's steps using CCTV footage, and believes that Gu-ryum may be linked to the cult and the organization itself. On a stakeout, Choi and Yu-chil get talking. Unfortunately, the latter uncovers something he shouldn't, and it eventually leads to Choi betraying his friend and knocking him out in the car. Jio watches from afar as Choi begins filling the car with toxic fumes, while he watches from outside. Choi eventually has second thoughts and pulls him free from the smoky car, trying his best to resuscitate his friend. Jio eventually shows his face and uses his electric powers to start Yu-chil's heart again. After saving his friend, Choi thanks Jio by telling him about the church and where to find the cult. At the same time, Chil-su finds Yu-won and once again wakes him up. He also encourages him to keep working and makes fake promises about his future. This, of course, is all feeling like deja vu given we've already had a conversation of a similar nature before. Anyway, Jio shows up at the church and waltzes in through the front door. There, he meets Ying-ae, who tells him she's missed him. He immediately grabs her round the neck and picks her up off the floor. When she tells him she's his mother, however, Jio quickly drops her and ponders over what to make of this revelation. Gu-ryum, meanwhile, drops the baby after seeing sparks emanating from her body. Somehow she picks the child up through the electrical barrier and cradles her tight. When Jio bursts in the room, she screams and calls out for him to leave. He does no such thing, telling her he can control his powers and can teach their daughter to do the same thing. Gu-ryum refuses to listen though and once again implores Jio to leave and stay with his parents. Jio promises her to wait there while he makes everything right. Jio eventually sits with Young-ae and Jin-kwon, asking them to clear Gu-ryum's name. Now that he's essentially sitting with his mum and dad, they encourage him to try and let go of his ill feelings and rule over the world. Jio refuses to fall for these mind games though, and scoffs at the notion of being labeled a deity. Jin-kwon tries to work his magic next, talking about an army of clones by his side that could make him unstoppable. Still, he refuses to budge. At the same time, Yu-chil arrives at the police station and notices that all of Choi's belongings are gone, and he seems to have cleared out his desk. As we soon find out, he too has gone up to the church, but in a bid to infiltrate the cult. He dresses like one of the followers and remains determined to go after those in charge. Everyone converges in the main chamber of the church as Young-ae is approached by an angry cultist. He's seen through her lies, but before things kick off, a blast of electric energy sees all the lights go out. This is just the opening Gu-ryum needs as she begins making her way down the hallway, fighting past the guards, while her baby is strapped to her back with blankets. As she fights, Jio surrounds himself in electric sparks as all the worshippers drop to their knees and look upon Jio like a god. Episode 11 of L.U.C.A. The beginning starts at the church, with Jio waltzing inside. With electricity crackling, the cultists all drop to their knees and begin worshipping him. Gurium meanwhile, fights her way past guards with the baby strapped to her back. She then heads outside and on the run. Unfortunately, she's stopped by a number of guards who render her escape futile. Jio shows up though, prompting all the guards to stand around and watch as they talk. Gurium suggests they escape, but Jio takes the child for himself and silently walks back inside. He talks to Gurium about his desires and how he believes changing humanity is the only way to proceed forward now. Meanwhile, Attorney Yung and Huang Yung-A discuss Jio's return and how he's akin to a deity. Yung wants to clone Jio, claiming she apparently works for many higher-ups from different organizations. After sighing, Yung-A succumbs, but apparently L.U.C.A and his subordinates have gone missing. As we cut across to this small band of goons, L.U.C.A gives them a list of targets to go after and kill. Those include Jio. He also tells them to use the baby as a hostage too if need be. Back at the church, Jio walks with Junquan, who comments how this cult that follow him makes him the leader and the king of this world. Junquan goes on to talk about war and how it's the biggest moneymaker. This is why Yung-A and the others wanted to create him in the first place, to try and stop that. Junquan laughs and tells his creation that he wants to make a whole army of clones like Jio. Jio suddenly agrees, telling him that humanity is nothing special. He's willingly going to allow himself to be cloned and decides to comply with the others. With Jio hooked up to the machine, they begin raising the level one at a time, intending to use his embryos by shocking him into submission. At the same time, Gurium continues to mope about with her baby. She talks to the infant, telling her how Jio was born, and promises that she's not a monster. Midway through the experiments, Jio hears his baby crying and instinctively rushes off, wires draping across the floor. Gurium stands watching, not even trying to help her child. Mum of the year, everyone, while Jio comes in and cradles the child, who's on bed with an electric force field just like before. When the electricity fades, Gurium snatches her up and tells him to leave. With the child crying, Junquan contemplates whether she may have amnesia. To further complicate matters, the cells in Jio's child are identical to his own, so this seems to back up that theory. On the back of this, Junquan decides to shift their focus across to his daughter, experimenting on her to prevent memory blackouts like he was originally experiencing. Following Jio's tumble off the roof, this may well have killed all the weak cells in his body, leaving only the strong. After feeding this fact back to Gurium, she mentions how Jio killed her parents and tells him to stop. He holds her hand and apologizes. Eyes turning blue, he shocks her, knocking the girl out so he can take the child and experiment on her. After injecting himself with another syringe, Yi-sun heads out with the others to begin the operation. This brings him to the church where he sits at the back and watches the service take place. When it's over, he shuts the door and chases after Yung-A. Yi-sun knocks the leader down, but she tells him it was Jio who killed Yuna. Despite stabbing him in the chest, Mr. Plot Armor shrugs it off and slices her across the neck. Meanwhile, Captain Choi shows up and takes one of the guards hostage outside the church. Gurium awakens from her slumber and bites her arm hard, drawing blood to lure the guards inside the room. Well, after knocking them out, she grabs the baby and takes off, with no one bothering to stop her. The hairs on Jio's arm stand up though as Yi-sun shows up with his goons. Jio decides to fight Yi-sun with his fists. That is, until he's knocked to the ground and then finally uses his powers. With a wire wrapped around Yi-sun's neck, he chokes the man out while shocking him. Anyone else want to bet he's not dead yet? Well, we get our answer later on when Yi-sun awakens and drives off. Damn it. Gurium holds Choi up at gunpoint and forces him to move. That is, until Choi saves her life. Unfortunately, he takes a fatal wound to the stomach in the process though. Gurium helps him outside and drives off, leaving Jio to watch them in the parking lot. On the way to the hospital, Choi mentions how there's one person he's been hunting all this time, and that person happens to be Yung-A. He also breaks the news that Jio wasn't the one who killed her parents, it was actually L.U.C.A. He too is the one who framed her for murder. With this, he dies. Gurium snatches up her baby and takes off after parking up near a building, closing a metal grate to prevent Jio from finding her. She apologizes when Jio shows up and takes off with the child. Jio uses his electric powers, but it's no good, Gurium is gone. Episode 12 of L.U.C.A. The beginning starts with Mr. Plot Armor himself arriving and trying to take down Jio. Yi-sun rasps that he's going to kill Jio's daughter and has nothing else to live for. With no reason to stay alive, Jio grabs Yi-sun and throws him into the fence. Finally, mercifully, he's now dead. Attorney Yung heads back to the church and examines the devastation. Yung-A is beside herself with anger, but Yung keeps a straight face and tells her they'll clean up this mess. While they argue, Jio shows up and asks for Yung's help. Given she's from the government, he agrees to comply in exchange for finding Gurium. Yung-A is against this plan, calling him a crossbreed, as Jio looks set to use his electric powers. He eventually kills Yung-A, squeezing her neck and letting his electric powers do the work. On the back of this, Yung decides to turn the church into a research facility. The cultists are gone, seemingly scattered after the death of Yung-A, and leaving Yung and Co. to have full reign over this operation. While Junquan does his best to keep Jio by his side, Gurium meanwhile ditches her baby on the rooftop and leaves a note asking Yuchil to look after her for the time being. Cradling the baby, he takes off. While he does, Gurium helps herself to a burner phone, despite just phoning Yuchil on her normal phone, and rings through to Yuchil, asking him to phone the number from Chil Su's business card. Only, upon doing so he gets an unknown number. He feeds this back to Gurium, letting her know that the number is from a burner. Eventually the pair meet up on the rooftop. They both sit at their laptops and notice some irregularities in Chil Su's phone records. It seems to be a breakthrough, and they both cling to this and work to come up with a solution. They get a ping on a parking lot, and Gurium goes searching. Eventually she notices Chil Su heading into the building and races after him. She heads up the stairs and immediately rings the fire alarm. This brings Chil Su out of hiding as Gurium blindsides him and begins beating the man down. He ties him up and questions the man over why he killed her parents. As he admits everything, she reveals that she's been recording this whole conversation. Chil Su scoffs at the threat, claiming that there's corruption everywhere and she won't win. Gurium, however, decides to use this to her advantage and phones Yuchil, letting him know that she's captured the boss. Despite his goons doing their best to stop her, Gurium takes off with Chil Su in her car. Unfortunately, they're blindsided that evening. Despite Yuchil's valiant efforts to fight them off, he's inevitably killed, while Chil Su manages to free himself from his binds. At the same time, Gurium takes off with her child. This cuts us back to the opening moments from episode 1 as Gurium charges up the abandoned building with her baby. She tries her best to control its electric powers, but it's no good. Across the way from her happens to be Chil Su, who brandishes a sniper and prepares to fire. Gurium drops her baby down the hole, allowing it to cocoon itself in a big bubble of electric energy. Jio arrives at the scene and chokes out one of the guards. As they ask him to stop, they stand around and watch as Jio and Gurium reconcile. He asks where their daughter is, but Gurium lies, claiming she's gone far away. As they talk, Gurium realizes that a sniper is pointed at Jio, and sacrifices herself to save him. Jio does his best to try and resuscitate her, but it's no good. Jio inexplicably uses his electric powers to rush out the building, and shrugs off bullets from Chil Su. He eventually kills the boss man, taking off with Gurium on his back. Unfortunately, it's too late and she passes away. In the morning, a worker finds the baby on the ground. Time passes, and as the baby grows up, it's revealed that that's not the only one. It seems Junquan was successful in creating his clone babies. Jio looks over them all and steps up to Yung and Junquan, looking like Neo from the Matrix. Electric currents rain down as the babies begin to awaken. Will we get a sequel? Will people tune in to watch? L.U.C.A. The Beginning is the perfect example of how not to write a story. With a botched ending, some contrived plot points and unconvincing characters, L.U.C.A is easily one of 2021's biggest disappointments. On paper, L.U.C.A actually has a really fascinating and unique premise. The show certainly lulls you into a false sense of security, starting off at a breathless pace, with lots of action, tension and dazzling set pieces. After the first 2 episodes, you think this would be a surefire hit for TVN, taking the best parts of superhero origin stories and combining that with elements of Final Fantasy VI's antagonist, Sephiroth. The execution, however, feels closer to Batman Forever. The story takes place in the near future, and begins with an incredibly alluring opening. In the dead of night, a hooded figure charges up an abandoned building cradling a baby. Dropping it off the edge, the baby suddenly crackles and sparks to life. Electric currents surge through the air as it seems this baby is some sort of chosen one. We then cut across to a man named Jio, an amnesia-stricken guy on the run and chased by thugs. He soon finds out he's armed with the same electrical powers that child was, and sets out to uncover the truth about who, or what, he is. While this is going on, we're introduced to spunky detective Gurium, who remains determined to make a name for herself in the police force. Her methods are risky though, and most of this hostility stems from the haunting memories of her parents being killed while she was a child. As Gurium chases after the truth, she runs into Jio and the two become entangled in this fight for the truth. Along the way the pair meet a group of cultists known as L.U.C.A, government agents, a mad scientist known as Jun Quan, and even a group of hired goons fronted by a man named Yi-sun. There's a lot going on here, and what begins as an intriguing puzzle box soon disintegrates into a mush of half-baked nonsensical elements that just don't work well together at all. I won't divulge everything that happens of course, but suffice to say every cliché in the book is thrown in. You've got illogical character choices, a profound lack of logic, antagonists with insane plot armor, a ham-fisted ending, and some pretty manic character arcs that would make Game of Thrones Season 8 blush. Gurium, for example, begins as a competent police officer, but soon descends into a damsel in distress, and a bit of a hypocrite to be honest, coming off the back of a contrived time jump, which ironically is where the trouble begins. The story is made worse by a lack of chemistry between the actors too, and L.U.C.A really feels like it's been written by multiple different people across the 12 episodes. Around episode 8 or so, the show really does take a quite noticeable nosedive in quality. In fact, what begins as an intriguing idea just seems to run out of energy by the end, and when episode 12 does eventually finish, leaving things with an open cliffhanger, you'll undoubtedly see this as a massive missed opportunity. Having said that, the show is graced with a pretty decent soundtrack, featuring some excellent tracks to set the mood. In fact, both the visuals and the sound design in this show are fantastic, and really help give this a big screen feel. Props to the entire production crew, you really can feel that they've given everything to this project. It's just a pity that the writing has let them down. Episode 2 is a great example of this too, with an absolutely breathtaking elevator fight. It's filmed completely with one shot, with no cuts from the camera, and swings around in such a clever way. This fight sequence is easily the standout element of the entire show, and if you don't get around to watching this series, please take 3 minutes out your day to watch this fight sequence, as it really is sublime. Unfortunately, L.U.C.A, The Beginning doesn't capitalize on its early season spark, and fails to deliver an electrifying Korean drama. Instead, those sparks eventually die out, leaving a frustrating and disappointing wasted opportunity.